Our first reading today is from the book of Genesis chapter 1, reading verses 6 to 10, and then chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work he had done in creation. Work seems to have a very narrow definition these days. Unless you're actively engaged in some kind of money-making exercise, be it as an employee or as a boss, what you're doing is barely considered work. Spending all day looking after small children is considered work if you're an early childhood teacher, but for some reason not as a parent. Mowing lawns and cutting hedges is work if you're paid for it, but not if you're a homeowner. Attitudes are changing slowly, but much of the work done in the world is not recognised as work. If you're a full-time parent and you're injured while looking after your children, good luck getting ACC to cover your costs of childcare while you're recuperating. But injure your ankle playing Saturday sport and ACC will come to the party, covering lost income while you recover, if you had a paying job before your injury. Now, there are significant equity issues tied up in all that, but it's only the symptom of a larger question. What is work? I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest a definition for work. It won't pass muster for the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment simply because it's far too broad for them to control. But what if we simply defined work as the act of creation? Our definition of creation is adding something good to the world. So now we have work as the act of adding something good to the world. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw that the light was good. God called this dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. The entire act of creation, from light to human beings, was work, and it was good. The number of implications that flow from here is stunning. I'm going to attempt to cover a few of them. I'd love to hear from you what I've missed. Implication number 1, creation is constant. I am constantly working because I'm constantly creating. Ideas, sharing smiles, cleaning the kitchen, looking after kids, packing someone's groceries, singing a song, watching a sunset, sitting in my chair. Some is obvious work, easy to identify. Some doesn't seem like work until we come back to that idea of adding something good to the world. It doesn't have to be a good that anyone but you can see or identify. It doesn't have to be a large good. It doesn't have to be a small good. It may even seem to someone else as being not quite so good. But it's not up to them to define your good. As you create, as I create, it is good and it is work. Second implication that comes out of this is that creation is costly. The act of creating, which is work, requires an investment. It is costly. That cost may seem small or large depending on what you're working on. It may require other resources, materials, money, space, opportunity. These are all what economists term opportunity cost. In other words, in choosing to create in one particular way, we give up, in that moment at least, the opportunity to create in some other way. As we're often reminded, there is no such thing as a free lunch. And so it is with the work of creating. There are many things I could be doing with my time right now. I'm putting those aside to go about the work of creating this message, which leads me to my next implication. Creation is choices. The work of creation involves making choices. As with everything about creation, these choices can be small or large. There is no defining principle that dictates those choices. First, there is the choice of what we will create, and from there is a cascade of other questions and choices to be made. How much time will I spend on this? What resources will I use? How will I decide when I'm finished? How will other people be affected by my work of creating? What opportunities am I prepared to give up in order to create in this particular way? Let me give you an example. Let's say that my work of creating is going to work as a petrol station attendant. It may not sound like much, but if it's my job, then it matters. And it can be just as creative for me as being an artist or an actor. I'm creating by engaging with customers. I am creating by supporting my employer to make money. I am creating by earning money that enables me to do other things with the rest of my time. I give up the opportunity to be unemployed. I use my resource of time and concentration and energy. I can work hard at making other people feel good about their day. These are all choices that I make as I go about my job. Mundane, perhaps, but I want to suggest that it's just as much a work of creating as separating the waters from the waters and making dry land and seas. Our second reading is from Mark chapter 6, verses 30 to 34. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all of the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. A fourth implication that comes from our idea of creation as work is that creation is tiring. Have you ever noticed how you can come in from sitting in the sunshine and feel tired? Of course, some of that is your body relaxing and letting go, but I want to suggest that some of that tiredness comes from the creating that is happening as you are refreshing and renewing your being. And there's all the other creating that we do: weeding the garden, cleaning the house, walking in the bush, going for a swim, cooking muffins, shearing sheep. Just a giant list of creative activity, all of which takes energy and effort. Everything about what we do involves our brain, our bodies, from the simplest task to incredibly complex undertakings. All that effort means we get tired. And getting tired means we need to rest. My figuring is that if it's good enough for God to rest after the work of creating, well, it's good enough for us to rest too. Of course, I'm going to argue in another message that resting is creative in its own way, but for now I want to focus in on the necessity of resting and why it might be more important to give thought to our resting than perhaps we might be otherwise inclined. Resting restores. I've been restoring the doors of my house. I want to reuse them because they're solid Remu doors and it would be criminal to throw them away. But they need a little love and attention. And so, with some help from my eldest son and from Derek and Steph, I've been working on those doors, stripping off the old paint and varnish, filling holes, resetting hinges, and with apologies to the purists among us, painting them, because even with all the restoration work, they're not in condition to simply slap on a coat of polyurethane. That aside, they're coming up beautifully. The dings and holes are gone, and without some inside knowledge, you would never know that they were second-hand, part used. Resting does the same thing for us. Work, by its very nature, puts dings and holes in us. Our muscles get tired, our brains get tired. Often there are emotional drains and spiritual trials and intellectual challenges that go along with the physical stresses. If we don't take time to rest, those things all build up. Eventually, you find yourself with holes right through and swinging precariously from one hinge. I suspect that is what was going on for Jesus and the disciples. We can see how busy they were by the fact they had no leisure even to eat. Of course, we can all do that for a while, but it's not sustainable over time. Without proper rest, we burn out and lose our creativity. Resting refocuses. Something else about resting is that it helps us to get an overview of where we've been and where we are headed. You'll know the idea of tunnel vision. There are very few of us able to keep both the moment and the big picture in sight at the same time. If all we're doing is head down and focused on what is in front of us, it's easy to lose track of where we're going. When you are learning bushcraft, one of the things you're taught fairly early on is to not watch the compass. If you do that, you'll likely walk in a big circle. Instead, you use the compass to get a sighting, perhaps on a high point or a distant feature. Then you put the compass away and walk toward that point that you've identified. Resting enables us to get out our compasses and figure out where we're going from here. Once we've identified that, we can carry on with our work of creating. I have this feeling that this idea of refocusing is perhaps more important than it may have been in the past. Change is upon us, and it's a little like the land is moving even as we walk on it. Pausing to rest and refocus helps us to keep a close eye on where we're headed and map out course changes as they become necessary. Resting reshapes. Have you ever gone to bed with a problem and woken up with a solution? One thing that resting does is enable resources we aren't even conscious of to go to work. It's kind of like part of our work of creating can only happen when we're not at work. Without good rest, we're only applying a part of the resources God has given us to who and how we are. That's actually a pretty cool way of thinking about resting. Which brings me to our homework for this week. First up, I want you to keep being purposeful in your creating. Plan to do one thing creative each day. It can be the same thing every day, like I've done this last week. Or it can be all sorts of different things. And come ready to share what you've been up to next week. Second, I want you to think about how you can be purposeful in your resting. I'm looking forward to hearing what you come up with. We pause before you, O God, just as you paused after your work of creating. We're each in different states, some of us energized and rearing to go, others weary and struggling to see any way forward. Help us to find our way in you. Where we need to rest, grant us insight to know how best to stop. Where we need focus, gift us your vision. Where we need to run free, point the way and set us on our way. We long to give you the glory with all that we are. May we touch the hem of your robe and find healing and hope in your presence. Through the love and mercy of Jesus we pray. Amen.